Hello, nonprofit leaders. I'm Sarah Olivieri, your host, and this podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders, make a bigger impact with insights, tips, and lessons learned from nonprofit leaders and experts. Having been an executive director, a board member, and now a consultant and coach, I truly understand the challenges you face. And that's why I'm here. I'm all about working smarter, not harder, so you can make a bigger impact without the burnout. And so is our sponsor, DonorBox. DonorBox isn't just a suite of helpful fundraising tools, it's a partner that helps you raise more money and supports you in retaining your donors. I love their forward-thinking approach. Visit donorbox.org to learn more. And don't forget to sign up for the Inspired Nonprofit Leadership newsletter, where you'll get bite-sized, actionable tips just for nonprofit leaders like you, delivered weekly to your inbox. Sign up at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Okay, let's dive into today's episode. My guest for this episode is Donna Dupont, who is the founder and chief strategist of Purple Compass, an award-winning designer and futurist with over 25 years of experience collaborating with leaders. She helps organizations build future literacy, navigate uncertainty, and drive impactful change. She combines systems thinking with strategic foresight and empowers leaders to mitigate risks, enhance preparedness, and seize opportunities for innovation. She has been recognized for her exceptional achievements and has received 7 government awards for excellence in policy, strategy, and partner relations. Her acclaimed futures research, Anticipation in Emergency Management, earned awards from the Canadian Defense and Security Network and the Association of Professional Futurists. She holds a Master's of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation from OCAD University. Welcome, Donna. You have such an impressive background, and we have such important things to talk about for nonprofit leaders. But before we do that, would you just share a little bit about yourself personally to round yourself out as a whole person?
Sure. So thank you so much for that that introduction, Sarah, and for the invitation to be on your podcast. So a bit about me. I'm known as a professional futurist, but I tend to go by the term foresight strategist. And essentially what it means is I help organizations navigate a lot of the complexity and uncertainty we see today. And it's really about tapping into their agency for change and to bring people together in different ways to help navigate those new paths forward. And so for me, it's quite personal because I became interested in futures when I was working as an emergency manager for the province of Ontario. And you can imagine in crisis management, you are constantly like in reactive mode. The stakes are high, people's lives are on the line. And so you need to respond very quickly. But after years of being in that role, I noticed the same patterns kept emerging all the time. And I thought, what if we could anticipate the future in a longer time horizon and perhaps we could make better decisions? And so that's when the whole conversation in my world started with how do we build that intelligence moving into the future? And that's when I discovered the world of strategic foresight. And I've had the pleasure of really practicing with a lot of different organizations, government, nonprofit, private sector in Canada and around the world to help really shape the future in different directions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And of course, it leads me to ask, like, the big question, how do we do that? But maybe you can frame up. So what is the thinking? What are, how do we think about the future?
Yeah. So I love the fact that you started with thinking because it really does start in the mindset. It's the mental model, it's our mindset, it's our culture that we're sitting in. And so we need to be aware of what is our relationship to the future? What do we think about when we think about the future? What are our thoughts? What are our emotions? Do we tend to be a bit more positive about the future, that no matter what happens, we're going to find a way forward? There's a hopeful narrative, an optimistic narrative there. Or is it more pessimistic, right? Which there's no judgment either way, but it's good to notice your internal compass and where your mind is orientating you. And then the second important consideration is, do you feel you have agency for change? Because sometimes people feel, yes, I know that I've got skills, I've got team, we'll figure this out. We've been through things before, we'll find a new way forward, even if we have to take small steps, and iterate, versus someone who says, no, I have no idea, there's no way, it's not possible, and therefore, there's no action. So knowing your internal compass and where your mindset is really important as an individual and as an organization, because
Mhm.
that really shapes the openness of how you approach today's really complex and fast evolving landscape.
Yeah, I can imagine that makes a huge impact. I know just I tend to be the person who just assumes there is a way that I have lots of agency over my future. And I know to a certain degree, like I just choose to believe that even when it's not true.
Yeah.
But I see that, going into rooms with nonprofits, especially when they're in a hard place
Yeah.
with a lot of challenges right in front of them, it can be very hard to feel like they have agency to achieve something significant. Like their minds often get small.
Hmm.
Do you see that? And if so, how do you help people think through that
Yes,
beyond
this
that?
this is common. This is very common, simply because oftentimes in our day-to-day work, we're in our routine, and there's a lot of constraints, and we're sometimes operating in silos. And so when there's a big issue, maybe individually we don't know how to approach it. We have some ideas, but it feels very fragmented. The way I work with organizations, including nonprofits, which I just facilitated a futures leadership workshop for a nonprofit just a couple of weeks ago. And what we did was we brought executives and management level peop, you know, participants together across a variety of different perspectives. And we looked at certain really important drivers of change, right? And we started to ask, okay, what does this mean for, the shifting landscape? What does it mean for our profession broadly, or the work that we do broadly, whether it's a sector or a specific field? And what does it mean for our organization? And so we were able to do that in small groups, but also report back to a collective broader group and share intelligence.
Mm.
And so it's being able to really extract and be able to build on this intelligence, not just individually, but collectively. And this is where you get a lot of important conversations happening and ideas that you can come out of a session like that and feel that, okay, we may not be able to solve this or control this, but we have some solid thoughts that we want to pursue and further explore. And that's the purpose of these strategic foresight workshops. It's really helping you to work with the complexity and really dive into the uncertainty, but it's all about new kinds of conversations and ideas.
Yeah. I can imagine. So I often find myself sharing with folks, it's more important than looking for the right answers or good
Yes.
answers is the search for great questions. Say if we can
So
find the
good.
right question, if we can
That's good.
find a great question, then the answer to whatever it is we need becomes so much easier. So I'm a collector of great questions,
That's
and I'm
amazing.
sure you have a few. So when you do
Yes.
workshops like this and you're working with clients, what are some of those questions that you start with that help get people's minds going?
Well, typically, before I go into a workshop with a client, we like to do a collective intelligence survey, right, with the organization so that we can capture some of the really important elements that are shifting. So we're really looking for drivers of change. We're looking for what are some of the big shifts that are happening, but also what are the smaller new things that we've never seen before. Weak signals of change that we have no reference. We can't forecast them. We can't predict them because we've never experienced this. And how do we see things converging that can be very disruptive? So that's the type of intelligence we try to gather ahead of time to understand, okay, these are some really important different domains of focus that we need to
Yeah.
take towards the system. It may not represent everything, but it's a great starting point. And then you can build from there. And that's what we take to seed the workshop. So the workshop is all about exploring, building new insights, ideating on some of
Mm-hmm.
those, right? And even if it's a small seed of an idea, we still want people to start to exercise that creative function. And it's amazing when you have report backs and people sharing ideas, something will resonate with another team and they can build on it.
Yeah.
And so you can see the interconnectedness of some of these pieces. So that's really the intent. And oftentimes when we're facilitating, because this workshop, that I did recently was 3.5 hours, but it was really engaging for everybody. Like they were able to unpack, and it was across 3 different levels. And there were times when people did not know. And I said, okay, what's your question? Where is your uncertainty? Because
Mm.
just framing that helps us to know, okay, this is an area that we don't know what to do. We don't have a great solid grasp on it. So we need to learn more about this space and
Yeah.
build more intelligence.
Yeah. I love that. What's your question? And especially I like that. What's your uncertainty? I ask my clients because I've been in many group coaching programs myself, and I shouldn't say hate, that's such a strong word, but I kind of hate it when people call it a Q&A. I was like, if I knew what to ask you, like you tell me what I should ask you. So I ask my clients just like, what's on your plate?
Yeah.
What issues are coming up? But I really love that. Like, what is that? What is that issue, that challenge? What is it that you're struggling with? What is it, describe around that thing that you can't quite say.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I can see how powerful that would be into getting almost like you said earlier, that internal compass, right? Something is
It's
bubbling
true.
in there,
It's true.
but what is it?
And sometimes it could be more subconscious that you recognize something, you're uncomfortable. Maybe it's a weak signal and you've never seen it before, but you know it's different and you don't have the words to articulate it. So this is an opportunity to capture all of that, and then we try to make sense of it for additional levels of action in future
Yeah,
workshops as well. But it's important to be able to identify and explore the uncertainty, because
yeah,
oftentimes when we in organizations we're very risk focused, right? We do risk assessments and we mitigate risks to maintain the status quo because we don't want to change, right? That's really what we're trying to do, is get certainty to make a
yeah,
decision. But oftentimes if you're looking at a fast changing landscape where things are changing daily, like geopolitically, economics, technology, you can't necessarily rely on a forecast to with any degree of certainty moving into the future, at least the long-term future. So this is where being able to expand your lens, look for the blind spots of how
mhm,
you're understanding the bigger picture, but also not just looking at what's emerging in terms of threat, but what are the opportunities
yeah,
potentially
yeah,
for you to leverage that can be a game changer for your business.
yeah,
And so you need to have a different mindset. You need to be in a growth mindset. And so this is what Foresight prepares you for. It's to help understand the landscape, understand the patterns, to start with that conversation that takes you not trying to predict the future, but trying to see how do we need to adapt and maybe transform for new opportunities in the future.
yeah. You've said so many powerful things. I want to just kind of unpack a couple of them. First of all, a weak signal.
Yeah.
It makes me think of a story, but I'm sure you have great stories. Like, could you just share one or two, like, weak signals, something that someone's like, "This is probably nothing," but and it was, like, uncovered something
Yeah.
significant?
Well, I think one obvious weak signal now, but maybe wasn't so obvious maybe 10 years ago, right, was AI. Because the
Mm,
research around AI has been ongoing for a long time. It just didn't start in the last few years. And it was being done in different ways, but some people had more experience because that was the world they were in, and
yeah,
others it wasn't part of our day-to-day world. We didn't really understand the utility and how it can be transformative but also very disruptive. In the last 3 years, we've seen AI just come on full force, and like you have ChatGPT, you have Gemini, you have all these different AI type of apps, and they do different things, and it's overwhelming because you're like, okay, wow, what do I use? How do I engage with this? And do I want to engage with it? So this is where there's a lot of fear because what you're seeing is AI was a weak signal for many years and then it gained momentum behind the scenes and all of a sudden, boom, it really hit its peak. And now you're seeing it flourish and being very disruptive, but also transformative, right? So this is where people become a little bit resistant because they're like, I don't want to change my job. I don't trust AI. I don't know if I want to use it. There's a learning curve. It
mhm,
requires change. And even for myself, because I've had to learn how to use different tools as well to add more value for my business and how I serve my clients. So I think that's really one clear example. And it's not slowing down.
no, yeah.
Agentic AI is on the horizon right now. It's we hearing a lot of talk about it in certain circles, but we don't know what it will fully look like when it arrives. And so this is a time to embrace technology, but also think about how you want to use it. Are you thinking about it as a tool?
Mhm,
To just, do certain functions? Or are you thinking about it as a potential collaborator,
yeah,
right? And ideating with AI and being really good at prompts, in order to understand how we can add value as part of a team, as part of
yeah.
your team. And not necessarily replace, but maybe open up new spaces and do things maybe more quickly that you didn't think were possible.
Yeah, it's such a great example, right? It came on like a slow, distant knock, and then all of a sudden it was pounding at your door. And I can see I'm thinking of I have 2 clients who work in areas related to climate change and just environmental wellness for our communities, and they're asking questions that have caused me thinking, "What is our environmental impact of AI adoption, and how do we adopt it in a way that is either makes us an agent of change or that we're mindful of it because there are
Yeah.
already water systems that be are being damaged by, there's physical stuff that powers this AI and it has real environmental impacts. So to me, like that's like right now a weak signal to me around AI. Like I'm hearing it. First, it was just one comment about, they're building a big facility. It's the size, bigger than Manhattan. And then but now they're coming a little more frequently, and so, as you say that, I'm like, "Oh, here's a weak signal that's coming in, and I'm starting to tune into it, and it's starting to get a little louder." And I'm
Yes.
sure that one will become ever present, knocking on many people's doors
Absolutely. I
rapidly
think
as well.
I think that's a great question you've just asked because you're right. We're focused a lot on the technology and trying to figure out, okay, do we use it? What do we use? How do we use it? But you're right. What powers it? Right?
Right.
That's another intersecting complexity to technology and AI and the amount of energy that's required to power and what that does to the environment, but also what it does to different industries. Like, for example, food, water, and energy are intricately related. There's a nexus. And so, what happens? How are we managing the energy? I think these are really important questions to start asking and think
Yeah.
about our own footprint. I don't know if there's anything out there that allows you to track your AI footprint. I would certainly be interested in something like that
Oh, me
because
too. Someone's got to make that, right?
absolutely, because we need awareness. Because if we don't have awareness, then we're operating with blindly and we have no
Yep.
information to understand our behavior. But once
Yeah.
we understand, okay, if I want to use ChatGPT to do something simple, how much energy does that draw? What does that mean? And how does that translate into something that I can understand in terms of environmental impact? I think
Yeah.
that's a really interesting piece around social responsibility
Yeah.
that we probably will see more of moving into the future. But I think
Yeah.
we should start raising it today.
I love it. Talking about like asking better questions and digging into these issues, like we're starting to dig into AI, it makes me think about, when ChatGPT first came out, like you only got so many questions a day in the free and you could
Yes.
pay to unlock more. And we quickly moved past that phase, right? Like people, I think, at least in every day, aren't hitting the upper limits of what they're willing to deliver. But if that moment had lasted longer, I might have listened to it louder as like, "Hey, like, how consuming is this that you can only take 4,000 characters at a time or, give me 10 answers a day?" It might have
Right.
said loudly to me, "Hey," right? Like, "This is very energy consuming. This is taking a ton of computing power." But I didn't really take that in, and now I'm, like, revisiting it in this
Mhm.
conversation right here because it went away so quickly. Like, that was a signal that was, like, a weak signal that came and disappeared,
Yes.
within a
There,
matter of months.
there was probably some sort of limitation behind the scenes of how much they could, deliver in terms of
They needed
computing
more money, I
capacity.
think, right?
That too.
The big
That
change, right?
too.
It's that, like, these AI companies have received huge financial investments to expand. I wanna also address because you there were so many things in there. With times of uncertainty and upheaval and crisis come opportunity. Tell us more about that.
So oftentimes, when we're in a crisis, we are just really focused on surviving and getting through the crisis. And that's important. We definitely want safety, stability, security, and so that's, as humans, that's what we're wired for. When crisis hits, we go into that, that type of mode, survivor mode. But on the other side of when you look at a crisis is something that is showing cracks
Mm.
within a system, right? And if you reflect on where things are breaking down, often those breakdowns are opportunities for questions about how do we need to improve, adapt, or transform this system. And so oftentimes you'll see in, an emergency crisis, they'll do lessons learned, a debrief to try to capture those like what went wrong, how could we do better, what are some of the vulnerabilities that maybe we could have mitigated. And that is such important information,
Mm.
combined with other information to start asking better questions about the future and how we can maybe create a new pathway forward that perhaps is more stable, more secure, so we're not repeating the same pattern over and over again.
Yeah, I love that. And I think I hear, we kind of started with mindset and now we're talking about recognizing patterns. Ultimately, it sounds like when we're talking about impact, planning our future, forecasting the future, impacting what our future will be, we're talking about change management in many ways.
Yeah.
And people have various like formulas and approaches. How do you think about, the steps to bringing about the change or designing a change and then actually having it come?
So for me, the first step is really building this case for change. And I love the Beckert-Harris formula for change. I don't know if you're familiar with it,
I'm not sure if I know that one,
but
but
but it's
take us
it's
through it.
it's all about overcoming resistance. And
Mm,
so there are three different parts to it. And I think it's a great frame when you're starting to build a case for change. It's definitely once you get into implementation side, you need other frameworks to go a little bit more deeper. But this is a good framing to understand and to get buy-in for the
yeah,
change needs to happen. So the
yeah,
first part of it is understanding where is the dissatisfaction in the system. And these are
yeah,
all of the breakdowns, the crisis, what's not
yeah.
working, what's
And
falling
crisis
away.
creates buy-in fast,
It
right? Right.
can.
That's one of the
It
opportunities.
definitely can. It can create buy-in to bring things back to normal, status quo, but not necessarily to
Mhm.
transform the system, right?
Mm,
But definitely gets people's attention,
yeah,
100%, because you have to act. So where's the dissatisfaction? Where are the issues, the challenges? And being able to identify those are very powerful. And identifying the ones that are really important, where you feel that if we were to make a change here, we could have a big impact. That's really
mm,
important. So to frame those challenges within the system and then think about, do we have a vision for the future?
yeah.
Oftentimes people don't. A lot of
Mm-mm.
people don't have time. They don't even think about the future. They don't allow themselves to stretch beyond what they're familiar with. And so this is why visioning sessions can be so powerful, especially if done collectively, because it allows you to really tap into something aspirational, like a
Yeah,
new direction to pull you forward into the future. You know, even if you don't have it fully formed, it's okay.
yeah,
It can be based on principles, values, a direction that we aspire to. And as we move in that direction, it might become more clear,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So once you have that vision of this is what we want, we're aspiring to, and this is where the problems are, it's the gap between the two that becomes the journey that you have to take, right? As an organization or as an individual, if you're navigating your own personal journey and your own personal vision, and it becomes the next step in that formula is the first step. So
mm,
what is the first step on that pathway that you want to go down? You know,
yeah,
that's doable, that you can learn, that you can start to see, make a bit of change, and you can grow, and then you can iterate and then take the next step and then the following one. Because it's once you start the motion and the action, you're going to learn, you're going to maybe adjust your thinking, but it also could lead you down to some new opportunities you didn't see before. So
yeah.
taking action, even if it's small, is so important.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important principle in our modern life, which has been around for a while, where the world changes quickly. Is it's like we had an era in which we could just research and then see what happened, figure things out, and then go in a new direction. But I think we live in a world now where it's like a living research, if you will, right? We have
Yeah.
to take action and observe research what happened from our action and then act again because we don't. The faster we go, it's like the shorter the horizon becomes. We can't imagine as many years out. I know the way I teach strategic planning now for nonprofits is we do strategic planning every 2 months and we just continually iterate. And
Yeah.
what happens in that process that I've seen taking nonprofits through it is you come up, we call it a cycle renewal, and you come up on that cycle renewal. And sometimes the next 6 months, the next year is clear. And other times it's like a big fog set in and like, we can't even really see past a month right now or a week
Right.
right now. And it is often that we are experiencing such change in the world around us that our ability to see, I think that horizon metaphor kind of really works. And the faster we go, it's like our ability. Do you feel this way that our ability to see into the future hasn't really improved? Or
Well,
maybe it's gotten worse? What are your thoughts on that?
well, there's a lot of disruption, right?
Yeah.
So when there's a lot of chaos and disruption, it's a fog. You're
Yeah.
right. The visibility is not clear. And this is why you want to, take on an intelligence process, foresight process, because it allows you to start to identify the parts so you can get clarity, right?
Yeah.
Because you need new tools to be able to navigate that. And that's really a lot of what foresight is. It's navigating that complexity and uncertainty to get the insights. But
Yeah.
so, yes, you have that fog that you're steering through, and that's the strategy part of foresight. But the vision part is your North Star.
It's where
Your
you want to
vision.
go.
It's where
And it's
you
only
want to
blocked by your
go.
mind.
It could be aspirational, but it's what where you're aiming towards. And so oftentimes you need to know your coordinates of where you want to go, right?
Yeah.
And then that you're going to go through storms. It's going to get a little bit chaotic at times. You're going to have to make different decisions, but you still want to go in the same direction, ideally, unless you do a radical transformative shift. And sometimes those that vision is based on principles and values,
Yeah.
right? Of this is what we stand for. Maybe we don't know all the details, but these are principles we stand for. And if opportunities come our way that are aligned with these, this might be a good strategic fit for us potentially. So
Hmm.
that's one way to navigate through that.
Yeah.
It's similar to, like, we all take, I mean, for example, Uber, right? We've all had experience with some sort of, app that is like a transport app. Would you get into an Uber if you didn't know where it was taking you?
Yeah.
Your
Probably
directions, your
over.
coordinates? Probably not.
I
So,
mean,
and
maybe. For
yeah,
some people who would.
yeah,
It would be
maybe
hard.
it'd be an interesting journey, right? But the thing is, it's a destination. And so you want to know where you're going. At least, broad sketches, from a
Yeah.
vision point of view. And if you're doing strategy without that direction, you could easily get very lost in your system.
Yeah.
And then you don't know what to do. And you feel a sense of you need to do more research, you need to think instead of taking action. Oftentimes it's the action, even the small steps that you learn so much from.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And if you don't know your direction, it's very hard to measure what's effective. What are we doing a good job? Are we doing an effective job? Well, I don't know. What does the job being done look like, right? Like
Right.
if we don't know that, then I can tell you you're doing stuff, but
Right.
we can't know like if it's the right kinds of things. All value, all value of whether it's good or bad or helpful or not becomes really irrelevant if we don't know what the end result we're looking for is.
Yeah, you
That's so
definitely need,
powerful.
and yeah, I agree with you. You definitely need to have a sense of the results you're looking to achieve. You don't want to just aimlessly do something without understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. Sometimes it's hard to evaluate early on because maybe you're evaluating more process
Yeah.
than outcome. Because
Yeah.
outcome, you might need some time to evaluate because there's a learning curve with anything new. And you're learning, if it's a new offering or it's an adjustment of service, there's a whole adaptation part
Yeah.
for you as well as your clients. So you need to give yourself time. This was often the case when I would design and implement like government programs. Oftentimes we would do process evaluation to
Yeah.
understand, okay, this is we're definitely hitting the right markers on this. We need to improve this. We need, so we had that sense. But outcomes, we gave ourselves, a year or two, you
Yeah.
know, to see, are we getting the short and longer term outcomes, and then you can make adjustments. But yeah, you definitely, it's good to have some sort of feedback, but you need to think about what's realistic at your
Mhm.
point in time, especially if it's something new that you're exploring and offering.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, when I teach goal setting, I teach goals come in pairs. And there's the goals for the things outcomes that you don't have control over. And then there's like your tactical goals or your process goals that are things you do have control over. And usually they're the things that you will hopefully get the
That's right.
outcome that you're looking for.
Right.
And you hear it again and again, people are like, "Oh, well, it didn't work." Well, is it because you didn't do the process, right?
Right.
Did you never learn it? Did you never adopt the new tool? Like, did you not actually do the work?
Yeah.
Or did you do it and you did it well and it didn't produce the result you want?
Yes.
Because the
Yeah.
change we need to make is dramatically different depending on whether it's, a problem with the process or a problem with the process achieving the outcome. Like we just picked the wrong process. And so many people give up on the outcome
Hmm.
when they didn't even fully implement the process
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. If you
Yeah.
don't have a strong, solid process, then yeah, of course you're not going to hit the outcome. And so you need to go in with a mindset of, okay, we're going to start with this process and we know it might not be perfect, but we're going to iterate and we'll need to make improvements if we're not getting the measures that we're hoping for. It's an opportunity to adjust, adapt, and that's the design part
Yeah.
of any kind of program design, or initiative or strategy, is that iterating and getting it quite right. Even experts in technology, they're constantly iterating and improving, and they understand their clients really well. So that's another question. If something isn't working, is this the right, are we solving the right problem? Is this adding
Yeah.
value to the client? Because maybe we've made an assumption about what the client needs in this context that may be held true but no longer applies, or it's shifted. And so these are important questions that when something isn't working, you need to diagnose
Yeah.
why it's not working.
Two questions, folks, right? Are we solving the right problem? And did we assume something that might not actually be
Yeah,
true? That's one
absolutely.
I learned years ago. I had a coach who would have just always said, "Are you assuming something that might not actually be true?" And people go, "Oh, oh, oh."
It's
And
so
then big
important.
things are unlocked. Well, yeah. Do you have a comment on that?
It's a great question. It's a question that we always bring up in futures thinking.
Mm,
Is what assumptions do you have? And it's good to document those,
yeah.
especially in a group around something, because it allows for a conversation around, oh, is that
Yeah.
true? Or maybe it's something someone else hasn't thought about. And so you can exchange and you can realize that maybe those assumptions need to be updated.
Yeah, I was just doing a visioning listening session with the group and we came up with a powerful one. They were talking about improving, community wellness overall, lift up, and they had been assuming that increased volunteerism helped make the community better. And they came to the conclusion after exploring that they didn't really have any evidence that was the case. And they mostly had evidence that volunteerism was a privileged activity and it was available in diminishing quantities. And they didn't really have any evidence of it
Right.
making a big community impact as
Right.
far as helping people who were economically disadvantaged or physically or, needing support in some way.
Hmm.
And that was a big one for them. It
Yeah.
dramatically changed the nature of their programming going forward.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, it can definitely, having a lack of evidence could mean that someone hasn't generated the evidence, right?
Right.
But it could actually work, but it's just something more that we've observed in our world, but no one's documented the evidence as
Yeah.
concretely as you need. So this is the opportunity for innovation potentially, but knowing that you don't have the evidence. So going in knowing, okay, we don't have the evidence, so maybe we need to start small. Let's figure out how this looks and see if we can start to build the evidence before we scale and we
Yeah.
commit to this on a large scale. That's usually how innovation and
Yeah.
designing
So
start.
we're pretty much at time, but that's caused another burning question for me. How do you grapple with at what point do we, how do we know whether we should keep looking for evidence or take a different direction? Scrap that idea, say the evidence isn't coming. Like, let's try maybe a path that might be more fruitful. How do you begin to make
Right.
that decision?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. The world that I work in, especially I do a lot of work in the climate change broadly space. And so there is a balance of best practices on things that we know work. And there's evidence. So you need to look at the context. Is it the same context? Is there something new that's happening that we need to consider in these best practices? So that's still something that exists, and it's important, to document and look at the best practices. But if it's not there, you know, you need to look at, okay, is this a new opportunity to adapt? And you need a different mindset for this. This is not implementing best practices. This is adapting and being more of an innovator mindset, right?
Yeah.
Or a visionary mindset where you're taking a little bit of a risk because you're trying something new, but that's
Mm-hmm.
okay because it's a calculated risk. You're
Yeah.
doing it based on your knowledge of the issue, right? The problem and what people need and what value you bring, and you're going to learn, and you're going to start small
Yeah.
with an idea, a service, a prototype, and you're going to learn. This is the
Yeah.
value of prototyping,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
learning in real time and starting small so that you can test, because your idea is not going to be perfect if it's really new, but you can test, you can see what works, get feedback,
Mm-hmm.
and then start to build that evidence that you need. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so powerful. I think when we use words like prototype, people know that word. I love the phrase, people don't know this as much, but they know it instantly, a safe to fail experiment.
Yes,
I think a lot of
100%.
nonprofits they think nobody wants to fund anything until it's like actually working. But the greater world and people with money know that prototyping is important. They know that research is important. They know that
Yes.
experiments are important. And I just want to say that out there for anybody who's thinking like, how do I apply what Donna's thinking? Like, how do I fund this? People want to fund that.
Yeah. Yes.
They do. You may have been scared to do it because in the nonprofit space, we're often told, don't experiment, right? Don't experiment with people's money, right? But
Right.
actually, people do want you to experiment. And
Yeah.
I think if you just tell them, they will fund.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more transparency around it. Like if you're trying something new, you can say, okay, this is where we're strong with the evidence.
Yeah.
This is where it's a little different in terms of the context. And we want to try this. This is the new part. And we want to, minimize the risk by doing a prototype to
Yeah.
learn, right? And so
Yeah.
that shows responsibility and transparency in your process,
Yeah.
that you know that part of the prototype, it's not about failure. It's about recognizing not everything is going to go perfectly well, but you're learning. This is a
Yeah.
learning mindset as well. So you're going to catch the learning and get the feedback, and you're going to improve it. So
Yeah.
eventually it will be successful, but it might take different steps to get it to where it needs to go. And so
Yeah.
you need to be prepared to learn and unlearn and relearn. That's the mindset. And so I agree with you. I think more people are hungry for change and innovation, but it does require being courageous and a little bold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's such a great note to wrap up on. Before we leave, what kind of folks should be reaching out to you and what's the best way for them to do that?
So I work with a variety of different organizations. I do a lot of work in defense and security for government and for nonprofits. And so for anyone who's interested in learning more about Foresight and how it can be helpful for the organization, they can go to my website at purplecompass.ca. I have on the front page, you can book a 20-minute free consultation just to discuss your needs, totally complimentary. And then there's also resources on my website to download our Future Intelligence Guide, which is an overview of all these different types of support services we can help with for your organization.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Donna. And thank you out there for tuning in and for everything you do to make our communities better now and in the future. I have a small favor to ask. Please take a moment to like and review this podcast wherever you're listening and share it with a friend or colleague who could benefit from these conversations. And remember, nonprofits are more complex than for profits, but you can win the game of nonprofit whack-a-mole by working smarter, not harder. Until next time, take care of yourself and all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.